Right? Yeah, we've got the second part of this. Been fire so far. But they're really kind of just getting into the questioning them now. So yeah, let's go.
Thank you very much. Now we'll go to Mr. Garcia.
Thank you. Again, thank you all for your service and for testifying today. Want to just talk about UAPs as it relates to what we're seeing in the pilots' interaction with UAPs. Particularly, Mr. Graves, one of the, I think, concerns for members of this committee is this idea that pilots, there's no system to actually report UAPs and the stigma around pilots. And so can you just briefly, you mentioned that you're working with 30 pilots right now that have had encounters with UAPs, but you've also, I believe, discussed and know of many more pilots. This is just those that you're currently working with. Is that correct? Can you expand on that?
Certainly. I'll break that down in two ways. First, when we were first experiencing these objects off the eastern seaboard in the 2014 to 2015 time period, anyone that had upgraded their radar systems were seeing these objects. So there was a large number of my colleagues that were detecting these objects off the eastern seaboard. They were further correlating that information with their other onboard sensors, and many of them also had their own eye sightings as well of these objects. Now, that was our personal first-hand experience at the time. Since then, as I've engaged this topic, others have reached out to me to share their experiences, both on the military side as well as the commercial aviation side. On the military aviation side, veterans that have recently got out have shared their stories and have expressed how the objects we were seeing in 2014, 2015 continued all the way to 2019, 2020, and beyond. And so it became a generational issue for naval aviators on the eastern seaboard. This was something we were briefing to new students. This is something that was included in the notice to airmen to ensure that there was no accidents. And now with commercial aviators, they're reaching out because they're having somewhat similar experiences as our military brothers and sisters, but they do not have any reporting system that they can send us to.
And let me just add, both to Mr. Fravor as well as Mr. Graves, not having this system for reporting, would you both agree that it's harmful to not just our national security interests, but to understand this phenomenon of what's happening with UAPs?
I think it's actually a travesty that we don't have a system to correlate this and actually investigate. You know, so if you took the East Coast, you know, there's coastal radars out there that monitor our air defense identification zone, so out to 200 miles. They can track these, you know, so when you see them, they could actually go and pull that data and get maneuvering. And instead of just having the airplanes, there's other data sources out there. And I've talked to other government officials on this. So you need a centrally located repository that these reports go to. So if you just stuck it in DOD, you wouldn't get anything out of the Intelligence Committee because they have a tendency to not to talk. But if you had a central location where these reports would come in, not just military, but also commercial aviation, because there's a lot of that going on, especially if you talk to anyone that flies from here to Hawaii, over the Pacific, they see odd lights. So I think you need to develop something that allows you a central point to collect the data in order to investigate.
Mr. Graves?
I would concur with everything Mr. Fravor said. I'll continue to say that the commercial pilots that have reached out to me through Americans for Safe Aerospace are doing so because they don't feel there's another way for them to report this safety issue.
And I think one of the clear outcomes of this hearing already is that there has to be a safe and transparent reporting process for pilots, both on the commercial side and the military side, to be able to report UAPs in a way that's also transparent, but also understands the scope of our national security interests and what may be classified or not. But I think there has to be some sort of system, and so that's something that I hope can be an outcome that this committee can work on. Is there anything else for the two of you briefly beyond this reporting system that you think that we can do as the government to encourage and facilitate more civilian reporting?
I think we're doing it right now.
Okay, great.
I think this hearing is going to show the American people that their government takes this topic seriously.
And how about civilians that may not be pilots? What kind of process could be in place for civilians who are not pilots, who may have UAP encounters? Do either of you have any suggestions that could facilitate that?
My recommendations would be to make that a sensor-centric operation in order to make it as objective as possible.
Okay. Sir, Mr. Fravor?
No, I agree with Mr. Graves on that.
Okay. Just briefly, I also just want to note, particularly for the two pilots, and I have a question for Mr. Grush. One of the things that I found fascinating in our discussion, Mr. Graves, last night as well, is that you both described UAPs and formations and the way they are observed in space or in our air, and the way that they move is essentially ways in which current technology or aircraft that we know of are unable to actually function or move. And so will you just, for the public record, again, once again, briefly just either describe or note that aircraft that are being witnessed, particularly by the 30 folks that you're working with, are essentially outside the scope of anything that we know of today and the technology we have today. Mr. Graves, Mr. Fravor?
Yes, the objects that are being seen by commercial pilots are performing maneuvers that are unexplainable due to our current understanding of our technology and our capabilities as a country. And that applies for the military as well.
Mr. Fravor?
Yeah, I concur with that. We have nothing that can stop in midair and go the other direction, nor do we have anything that can, like in our situation, come down from space, hang out for 3 hours, and go back up.
Thank you. My last question, and sometimes I know that you have also said some of these answers in the past, but we're trying to get them on the public record as well, which is really important. Mr. Gresh, finally, do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the firsthand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I would just say that I think that these questions are important questions, and I look forward to being involved in the process to get those answered. I know there'll be a lot of questions from other committee members, so I yield back.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Burchett himself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Garcia. I would like to have you on my legislation to do just that on the reporting, and we'll get together on that. Maybe you can be my co-sponsor on that. That'd be really cool. Thank you for those great questions. Mr. Graves, again, I'd like to know, how do you know that these were not our aircraft?
Some of the behaviors that we saw in a working area, we would see these objects being at 0.0 Mach, that's 0 airspeed, over certain pieces of the ground. So what that means, just like a river, if you throw a bobber in, it's going to float downstream. These objects were staying completely stationary in Category 4 hurricane winds. These same objects would then accelerate to supersonic speeds, 1.1, 1.2 Mach, and they would do so in very erratic and quick behaviors that I don't have an explanation for.
Okay. Have you spoken to commercial and military pilots that have seen these off of our East Coast?
I have.
Okay. Mr. Fravor, I noticed that in the Tic Tac video, it's Tic Tac like the candy, not TikTok like the Chinese Communist app.
That's correct.
Yes, sir. I just want to make that because my daughter corrected me on that and called me a boomer and said, "Hey, boomer," and I said, "No, baby, it's Tic Tac like the candy. You're gonna have to just look it up." And but now I would also like to say today is a day of many firsts. It's a miracle that we're having this meeting, and it's also a miracle that my wife has put up with me for 9 years today. Today is my anniversary, so I want to tell my wife happy anniversary and that I love her very much. As she likes to say, this 9 years have been the best 2 years of her life. So, thank you. Mr. Fravor, what astonished you the most about the flight capabilities of these Tic Tac, very briefly?
The performance, absolute performance. It was.
And you're not aware of any other objects that anybody in the world has, in this world, that has those capabilities?
No, I think it's far beyond actually our material science that we currently possess.
I see one of them say, I think it was on Joe Rogan, but one of the reasons why they don't think it's another country even, because if a country had the ability to do that, they'd already run the world. Like no human would have that technology and use it to watch other countries if you could do the things that they say these things can do.
Are you aware of any other reconnaissance platforms that have tracked or recorded the Tic Tac's maneuvers, maybe the NORAD system or any of the others?
I am not.
Okay. Mr. Grush, thank you for being here, brother. Thank you all very much. Have you faced any retaliation or reprisals for any of your testimony or anything on these lines?
Yeah, I have to be careful what I say in detail because there is an open whistleblower reprisal investigation on my behalf, and I don't want to compromise that investigation by providing anything that may help provide somebody information. But it was very brutal and very unfortunate, some of the tactics they used to hurt me both professionally and personally, to be quite frank. Yeah.
It's very unfortunate. As they say, when you're over the target, that's when they do the most firing at you. Do you have any personal knowledge?
But it's like Bob Lazar when he said that he got kicked off the program because they would tap in his house and discovered that his wife was having an affair with someone else. So just off the fact of that, they kicked him off the thing because you have to have a stable home life.
People have been harmed or injured in efforts to cover up or conceal these extraterrestrial technology.
Yes. Personally.
Have anyone been murdered that you would that you know of or have heard of, I guess?
I have to be careful asking that question. I directed people with that knowledge to the appropriate authorities.
Maybe in a, if we could get in a confidential area, SCIF, we could talk about that. But unfortunately, we were denied access to the SCIF, and that's very unfortunate in this scenario. Mr. Favor, do you believe that you witnessed an additional object under the water in relation to your encounter?
I will say we did not see an object. There was something there to cause the whitewater, and when we turned around, it was gone. So there was something there that obviously moved.
Okay, it was not the same object though that you were looking at, correct?
No, we actually joked that the Tic Tac was communicating with something when we came back, and because the whitewater disappeared.
We were, in another instance, we're told about the capabilities of a jamming during viewing of when there were some people chasing some of these objects. Did you experience any of that jamming or interrupting your radar or weapons system?
My crew that launched after we landed experienced significant jamming to the APG-73 radar, which was what we had on board, which is a mechanically scanned, very high-end system prior to the APG-79. And yes, it did pretty much everything you could do: range, velocity, aspect, and then it spit the lock, and the targeting pod is passive. That's what we were able to get the video on.
I'm about to run out of time, but are you aware of any of our enemies that have that capability?
No.
Okay, I would also like to note for the record that, like George Knapp, breaking Area 51, he's the reason I knew about that, and the reason I know about the Tic Tacs is Leslie Keene from New York Times article, and I would encourage everybody to read that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back to you for no time.
Very good. Mr. Raskin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Graves, you reported UAP encounters during training flights, I think, and have since come forward to warn the Pentagon that these encounters may be putting pilots at risk. My first question is, you've identified these as taking place on the East Coast. Is it just on the East Coast where these encounters have been reported?
No. Since the events initially occurred, I've learned that the objects have been detected essentially where all operations, Navy operations, are being conducted across the world. And that's from the Ultimate Anomaly Resolutions Office reporting.
All right, can you describe your experience after you decided to come forward and go public with your experience?
Certainly. Like many others, in 2017, I saw the New York Times article come out as well. And for me, it was special because I recognized the voices on the video. I recognized the video itself. I had seen it when it was taken. I'd seen it when it was debriefed. And so that kind of shook me because I realized that this problem was still ongoing. And so I reached out to colleagues back on the East Coast and realized that this was still a safety risk that they were dealing with, that they had essentially hit a wall with how they could move forward on this conversation. It was at that point when I decided to try to move the conversation forward myself.
Are there common characteristics to the UAPs that have been cited by different pilots, and can you describe what the convergence of descriptions is?
Certainly. We were primarily seeing dark gray or black cubes inside of a clear sphere.
I'm sorry, dark gray or black cubes?
Yes, inside of a clear sphere, where the apex or tips of the cube were touching the inside of that sphere. And that was primarily what was being reported when we were able to gain a visual tally of these objects. And that occurred over almost 8 years. And as far as I know, it's still occurring.
So I take it that you're arguing what we need is real transparency in a reporting system so we can get some clarity on what's going on out there, because there are many pilots.
The fact that it's people see circle lights. That might explain why they are able to do right angles if it's a square, if it's a cube, because you could just do it like a.
In your situation, but we should have a way of developing a systematic inventory of all of such encounters. Is that right?
Yes, and I think we need both transparency and the reporting. We have the reporting, but we need to make sure that information can be promulgated to commercial aviation as well as the rest of the populace.
Mr. Grush, what about you? What was your experience after you came forward?
Well, it's only been about 2 months or so, so I guess my experience has been overwhelming support from former colleagues of mine that have privately messaged me, and I do appreciate that. But I do have knowledge of active planned reprisal activity against myself and other colleagues, and it's very, very upsetting to me.
Coming from where?
Certain senior leadership at previous agencies I was associated with. And that's all I'll say publicly, but I can provide more details in a closed environment.
Okay. Well, I hope you understand that there would be bipartisan rejection of any attempt to vilify, demonize, or engage in other reprisals against our witnesses and people who are telling the truth from their perspective.
Yeah, there were certain colleagues of mine that were brutally administratively attacked, and it actually makes me very upset as a leader to see that happen to other coworkers and actually superiors of mine over the last 3 years.
How do you account for that response? That seems like a bizarre response.
I call it administrative terrorism. That's their quiver, their tool in the toolbox to silence people, especially the career government service cares about their career, cares about their clearance, their reputation to climb the ladder. And when you threaten that career path, a lot of people back off. But I'm here to represent those people. So,
Mr. Fravor, what about you? What has your experience been since you've come forward with your perspective on this?
Actually, I've been treated very well. And the 6 people that were involved, myself included, all of them have or will be retiring from the military as 05s or 06s. And all my friends that are very senior, 3 and 4 stars, I've talked to them. They believe, they understand there's a problem. But no, I was actually treated really well.
And what is your general interpretation of these phenomena, or what is your current thinking of trying to make sense of them?
Well, I'll say, I'm not like a UFO fanatic. It's not me. But I will tell you that what we saw with 4 sets of eyes over a 5-minute period, still, there's nothing, we have nothing close to it. It was amazing to see. I told my buddy I wanted to fly it, but yeah, it's just an incredible technology.
All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I'll yield back to you.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's the same with Bob Lazar. He said the same thing, but he's like, to be honest, I don't want to hear your UFO stories. Like, I have people come up to me and tell me they've seen this or been. He's like, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in UFO stories or anything. It's like, I just would love to get my hands on that technology as a kind of nerd, basically. In a very nerdy way, he wants to just get his hands on this technology, which is way, way, way beyond what we could even imagine. Now, was it Bob Lazar said that the only thing they worked out in the time he was there was how the hatch worked, and he said it was like the eggshell effect, whereas if you have or egg box effect, or even an egg, but from one side it's sturdy if you push down on it, but if you push it in from the sides it collapses. And he said that's how the hatch worked or something like that. He's like, that was pretty obvious. That was the only thing he saw on the ship that we have, or at least we understand what it is. But yeah, this is fascinating, and I will carry on later, but me and the puppy are gonna nap. But yeah, that's the reactions. We'll eat. All right. Yeah. So carrying on with this. I've gone back. I think we went about 30 seconds ahead, if that. But yeah, let's carry on. Let's go.
And what is your general interpretation of these phenomena, or what is your current thinking of trying to make sense of them?
Well, I'll say, I'm not like a UFO fanatic. It's not me. But I will tell you that what we saw with 4 sets of eyes over a 5-minute period, still, there's nothing, we have nothing close to it. It was amazing to see. I told my buddy I wanted to fly it, but yeah, it's just an incredible technology.
All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I'll yield back to you.
Thanks. On to Ms. Luna.
Mr. Grush, in speaking to you yesterday, I just wanted to follow up on Representative Raskin's questions. In the last couple of years, have you had incidences that have caused you to be in fear for your life for addressing these issues?
Yes, personally.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want everyone to note that he's coming forward in fear of his life. To put in perspective, if they were really not scared about this information coming out, why would someone be intimidated like that? To your knowledge, are NHIs working with adversarial foreign governments in either technology exchange programs or back engineering programs?
I don't have data on that. I'm not sure.
Have you heard or you had people come forward to present that evidence?
Not that particular evidence that you just espoused.
Okay, on the 19th of April, Dr. Kirkpatrick, head of Aero, had said that he did not find any evidence of UAPs. You also stated that you had, in your interview, that you had briefed him on information that you were uncovering, but that he did not follow up with you. Were the items that you divulged to him pertinent to national security?
Yes, him and I had a classified conversation in April 2022 before he took over Aero in July 2022, and I provided him some concerns I had.
Do you know why he might not have followed up with you?
Unfortunately, I cannot read his mind. I wish he did. I was happy to give sage counsel to him on where to look when he took the helm of Aero.
Okay, and then my last question for you before I move to Mr. Graves is you received prior approval from the Defense Department to speak on certain issues, correct?
Correct, through DOPSR, DoD Pre-Publication and Security Review, and I just want to remind the public, they're just looking from a security perspective. These are my own personal views and opinions, not the department's.
Okay, I'm asking that though mainly because I think that there are many people that would like to discredit you. So it does bring a certain amount of credibility to your testimony.
I'm required by law to do that as a former intelligence officer, or I go to jail for revealing classified information.
Yeah, we don't want you to go to jail. My next question would actually be for Mr. Graves. Can you please explain to me in detail the event that occurred at Vandenberg Air Force Base?
Certainly. In the 2003 timeframe, a large group of Boeing contractors were operating near one of the launch facilities at Vandenberg Air Force Base when they observed a very large 100-yard sided red square approach the base from the ocean and hover at low altitude over one of the launch facilities. This object remained for about 45 seconds or so before darting off over the mountains. There was a similar event within 24 hours later in the evening. This was a morning event, I believe 8:45 in the morning. Later in the evening, post-sunset, there were reports of other sightings on base, including some aggressive behaviors. These objects were approaching some of the security guards at rapid speeds before darting off. And this is information that was received through one of the witnesses that have approached me at Americans for Safe Aerospace.
Was this documented in any official form, whether it was a police blotter?
Yes, they had official documentation and records from the event that the witness held over the years.
And I'm not going to ask you to do it right now for time reasons, but you'd be able to sketch what was witnessed, correct? And have you seen that before on any other equipment and or during your flight time?
I have not seen what they've described. This object was estimated to be almost the size of a football field, and I have not seen anything personally that large.
Okay, and then another question on follow-up referencing the gimbal video go fast incident. Can you just clarify, because to our understanding the footage was actually cut off at a certain point, but what happens at the end of that video, just for those Americans specifically that are wanting to know about the rest of that footage?
Certainly. There was some uncertainty or instability with the object. It seemed to rock a bit, and that's the last I had seen of the video. Much of the data that I would recommend be analyzed would consist of radar data that would provide precise kinematics on the object, as well as the fleet of objects that were operating nearby.
Okay, and follow up in regards to the reporting procedures that Mr. Garcia had addressed on, as well as Representative Burchett. With the FAA, to your understanding, pilots that are seeing this, commercial airline pilots, are they receiving cease and desist letters from corporations for coming forward with information in regards to safety for potential airline passengers?
I have been made privy to conversations with commercial aviators who have received cease and desist orders.
So the American public should know that corporations are putting their own reputations on the not the line, but ahead of the safety of the American people. And I think, would you agree with that statement?
It appears so.
Okay. And I guess this would be my last, I'm out of time. I yield. I'll be back.
Good. Mr. Moskowitz.
She was actually quite good.
Thank
Funny
you,
her
Mr.
name's
Chairman.
Luna.
Gentlemen, let's talk about the laws of physics for a second. Mr. Graves and Commander Favor, I heard you talk about speed. When those objects broke the sound barrier, did they make a sonic boom?
I was in a jet. You can't hear anything. It's kind of loud in there.
Yeah, you're not able to actually personally tell within the vehicle. I will say the objects that we were seeing, they were spherical, and they were observed up to Mach 2, which is a very non-aerodynamic shape.
What about G-forces? Let's talk about G-forces of those vehicles. Could a human survive those G-forces with known technology today?
No.
No, not for the acceleration rates that we observed.
Okay. What about what they look like? How close did you get? Did you see a seam or a rivet or a section? And what I mean is, obviously, the jets you're flying have all those things. Did these objects have those?
Do you want to go around?
I didn't have the detail to be able to tell that.
So we got within a half mile of Tic Tac, which people say that's pretty far, but in airplanes, that's actually relatively close. No, it was perfectly white, smooth, no windows, although when we did take the original FLIR video that is out there, when you put it on a big screen, it actually had two little objects that came out of the bottom of it. But other than that, no windows, no seams, no nothing.
Mr. Grush, as a result of your previous government work, have you met with people with direct knowledge or have direct knowledge yourself of non-human origin craft?
Yes, I personally interviewed those individuals.
Mr. Grush, as a result of your previous government work, have you met with people with direct knowledge or have direct knowledge yourself about ATs, advanced technologies that the U.S. government has?
Based on conventional advanced tech, I was briefed to the preponderance of the Defense Department's both space and aerospace compartmented programs, yeah.
Do you have knowledge or do you have reason to believe that there are programs in the advanced tech space that are unsanctioned?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you say that they're above congressional oversight, what do you mean?
Complicated question. So there's, some, I would call it abuse here. So congressional oversight of conventional special access programs, so I'll use Title 10, so DOD as an example, right? So 10 U.S. Code Section 119 discusses congressional oversight of SAPs, discusses the DepSecDef's ability to waive congressional reporting. However, the Gang of Eight is at least supposed to be notified if a waived or waive bigoted unacknowledged SAP is created, and that's public law.
Well, so that how does, I don't want to cut you off, but
Yeah.
how does a program like that get funded?
I will give you generalities. I can get very specific in a closed session, but misappropriation of funds and
Does that mean
self-fund.
that there is money in the budget that is said to go to a program, but it doesn't, and it goes to something else?
Yes, I have specific knowledge of that. Yep.
Do you think U.S. corporations are overcharging for certain tech they're selling to the U.S. government, and that additional money is going to programs?
Correct, through something called IRAD.
Okay. Satellite imagery. Let's talk about satellite imagery. We have satellites all over the place, some that we're aware of and many that we're not aware of, right? We're taking pictures of everything at every point and second. Mr. Grush, are you aware, do you have direct knowledge, or have you talked to people with direct knowledge that there are satellite imagery of these events?
That was one of my primary tasks at NGA, since we process, exploit, and disseminate that kind of information. I've seen multiple cases, some of which, to my understanding, and of course I left NGA in April, so that's my information cutoff date. But I personally reviewed both what we call overhead collection and from other strategic and tactical platforms that I could not even explain prosaically. And I have a degree in physics, by the way, as well. And I am aware that you guys have not seen these reports, unfortunately. And I don't know why.
Do you have direct knowledge, or you had spoken to people with direct knowledge that this imagery applies to crash sites, crash imagery?
I can't discuss that in an open session.
Okay. Do you have any information that the U.S. government is involved in a disinformation campaign to deny the existence of certain UAPs?
I can't go beyond what I've already stated publicly in my News Nation interview because it touches other sensitivities.
Okay. I'll yield the balance of my time back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to stop there again because I've got shopping, but this is definitely interesting. I like the questioning of it as well. Especially that Luna, Mrs. Luna, which is an incredibly convenient name to have. But she genuinely seemed interested and seemed like she wanted to help. Like, I think she was the first one to make a real point of that these people that come forward feel threatened for fear of their life. Yeah. But yeah, like I say, I have a shopping thing coming, but I will come back. Yes, sweet. Alright, yeah. Well, let's just carry on. Yeah, let's go.
Ms. Fox?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Garouche, in your sworn testimony, you state that the United States government has retrieved supposedly extraterrestrial spacecraft and other UAP-related artifacts. You go so far as to state that the U.S. is in possession of, quote, non-human spacecraft, end quote, and that some of these artifacts have circulated with defense contractors. Several other former military and intelligence officials have come forward with similar allegations, albeit in non-public settings. However, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the director of AARO, previously testified before Congress that there has been, and I quote, no credible evidence thus far of extraterrestrial activity or of, quote, off-world technology brought to the attention of the office. To your knowledge, is that statement correct?
It's not accurate. I believe Dr. Kirkpatrick mentioned he had about 30 individuals that have come to Aero thus far. A few of those individuals have also come to Aero that I also interviewed,
Okay.
and I know what they provided Dr. Kirkpatrick and their team.
Okay.
I was able to evaluate
Okay,
that information.
I need to go on.
Sure.
But my understanding...
She's a right
that
old
this-
stick in the mud.
His statement is accurate, came from a direct quote. And this contradiction is a perfect example of why we need to inject transparency into our government. And for another example, look no further than the pitiful response to the Chinese spy balloon debacle earlier this year. You may remember the mass confusion that ensued when the balloon was first spotted over Montana, 4 days after it first entered U.S. airspace over Alaska. The Biden administration's initial inability to address the object grew into a continuous series of embarrassments. After news of the balloon reached the mainstream media, we were assured that the balloon posed no threat to our security. However, after the balloon was allowed to transit the entire continental United States, fighter jets were scrambled off the coast of South Carolina to shoot it down. This flip-flopping and obfuscation caused needless confusion, fear, and panic across the country. It's my hope, Mr. Chairman, that this sort of confusion will not be repeated. We should investigate the extent to which elements of our government possess or do not possess information that is of critical value to the American people. We owe it to the citizens of this nation to make sure that our government is transparent and accountable. We must make sure that our government provides answers and Congress must do its duty to solicit those answers. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yeah, Mr. Frost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2022, NASA announced that it was commissioning an independent study team to examine UAPs. The NASA team is comprised of scientists across different fields, as well as former astronauts and pilots. In May, the independent study team held at its first public meeting, which included the perspectives from NASA senior leaders, as well as perspectives from the Department of Defense and intelligence agencies. The NASA study team is also expected to release its first report pretty soon, and I think it's safe to say that we all eagerly await its results. Mr. Graves, how might NASA's research influence the commercial industry regarding safety in UAP?
I think NASA has a big role to play as far as commercial aviation safety, and it's one of their original charges as an organization. One of the recommendations that have been put forward is to utilize their existing aviation safety reporting system to serve as a short-term fill and trusted platform for pilots that want to report on UAP. It also has built-in analytics capability and is funded by Congress.
Gotcha. And also, Mr. Graves, are there any other industries that may be influenced by the NASA research on UAPs? And if so, how so?
Well, I think there is a large swath of commercial capabilities that could be brought to bear on this topic, from space-based or ground-based sensor systems that are available open source or through commercial marketplaces. And I think NASA's work, as they work to identify and highlight specific parameters that can be found, we can take that information and promulgate this through the public sector so that we can have a more open conversation about what we're seeing.
You know, in 2020, the Department of Defense released several videos of UAPs, including Mr. Freyr's experience, U.S. Navy pilots that recorded footage. In 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a preliminary report on UAP events. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson stated that NASA would begin to investigate these events. In fact, I sit on Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and when we were doing a hearing with the NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, I asked, you know, why NASA needed to be fully funded, and there were many great reasons, but one of them was actually had to do with UAPs. He actually mentioned, you know, is there life out there? I don't know. And so either way, these actions ultimately led NASA to assemble the independent study team that I mentioned earlier. Also in 2021, Harvard University stood up the Galileo project to research and examine the origins of UAP. So it seems like both, you know, from NASA and...
But the trouble is, isn't it like, who said it? Graham Hancock. Another great Joe Rogan interview, but he talks about it in that field where they say that the pyramids are older than we think they are. The Sphinx wasn't built as the same part as that. It's much, much older. And Graham Hancock says some of the most skeptical for kind of skeptical to the point of I don't know how to word it. But basically, the hardest people you're going to get to see what it is the educated people, because they've been educated and think that what they know is the gospel. But like time and time again, they've proved it's not. But yeah, I think like for NASA to say, oh yeah, it's a bunch of like snotty-nosed scientists. They're already getting embarrassed by Elon, or already have been. He's the first one to do things they haven't done. Yeah. I don't know. I don't hold a lot of stock in kind of NASA or these people, because I think that they're too cynical. Because it's like Ricky Gervais. Take for example Ricky Gervais, and he says, like, ghosts are impossible, and these things are impossible. Like, they cannot happen 100%, not real. So, but how do you know that? You don't know that. Like, you know that only set off the base of rules that has already been laid out for you, which you didn't actually come up with. and not to say that there is ghosts or whatever, but to say that absolutely is not, never been, it's kind of ridiculous with anything, because you don't know. Anything's possible. If the fact that, think of like what's the possibility of us being just the right distance from the sun, uh, have just the right mass and just the right gravitation, and all of that, just the right amount of water, everything just the right amount, spinning just the right amount, traveling through speed at just the right, through space at the right speed. Just all of this is, if you had to bet on it, you would never ever bet on it. It's kind of impossible in itself, that the fact that even life even exists is impossible. So anyway, I don't know, I'm rambling, but sorry.
In the higher education community, because of the work that y'all have done and people standing up, I think we're seeing some of that stigma slowly going away. Mr. Freyer, do you believe that military pilots feeling empowered to share their UAP experiences has directly impacted the scientific community's research goals on this topic?
I would say yes. I would say that, starting in 2017, when it actually came out, it took that stigma away. I mean, I've talked to multiple senators who said prior to that, if you'd have mentioned UAP, you'd have been laughed off the hill. And now we're sitting here today for a public testimony.
Yeah, it's
on
crazy.
What's actually going on. I'm hoping that this curve will be more of an exponential, and we'll get more and more transparent to the level that we can.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. I couldn't imagine. I'm not a pilot, but I used to fly gliders in Civil Air Patrol. Huh? Yeah.
Pilot?
I mean, and so either way, I mean, I couldn't imagine, being in the glider and seeing something, and then not feeling like I had the agency to talk about it. Mr. Graves, can you discuss the importance of seeking scientists to sit on your advisory board?
Absolutely. I think ultimately this is going to be a scientific problem. And not only that, it's also an engineering problem. I've been working with the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics to help them stand up a UAP integration committee to help integrate their engineering prowess into this problem. And so, yes, very much, I think this is an engineering and scientific problem as much as a national security problem.
And how might Congress help to facilitate partnerships between the scientific community and the UAP focus groups within government?
Well, I think one of the things they can do is to have these types of hearings to communicate to the public that this is a topic of interest. I think that there is a pseudo-market, if you will, of interested capabilities and talent that want to approach this topic, and we're seeing that start to grow now. So I think continued conversation, reduction of stigma is going to allow that to flourish and allow answers to help generate themselves.
100%. Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you for your work. I think it's important that we keep our top scientific minds focused on this issue and look for ways to increase collaboration. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Mr. Comer.
I have seen one scientist, I can't remember, it might have even been, what's his name, Michio Kaku, whatever his name is. But one of them type of scientists, but saying that there's two possible alien, like the two chances that you have is, one, we are completely alone. There is nothing anywhere in the rest of space, and we just happen to be a weird phenomena of space that has only happened here and nowhere else. Or there is advanced aliens that are here, and they're not just spotted about. Like, basically, if aliens do exist, the chances are they are already here. And if they are already here, they're everywhere and we just don't know. These little glimpses that say they get. And that's the other thing as well. I think that that started to get people back on the alien thing, was when these type of people, once it goes into military and things like that, and you get military reports, it's a completely different thing, because they know what they're dealing with day to day. And for them to say, I don't know what that is yeah, it's definitely interesting.
Mr. Chairman, let me say I want to thank you for having this hearing, and I want to thank Mr. Burchett, Ms. Luna for leading this hearing. And with that, I yield my 5 minutes to Mr. Burchett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to direct this,
Hold
I
on.
believe, to Mr. Grush, but if
Yeah, I'm going to have to look up some of that grush, matey, but I just need to make another coffee. 2 seconds. All right, yeah, let's carry on. Let's go.
any of you all feel like you need to jump in, just jump right in. We're good. Has the U.S. government become aware of actual evidence of extraterrestrial, otherwise unexplained forms of intelligence? And if so, when do you think this first occurred?
I like to use the term non-human. I don't like to denote origin. Keeps the aperture open, both scientifically. Certainly, like I've discussed publicly previously, 1930s.
Okay. Can you give me the names and titles of the people with direct firsthand knowledge and access to some of this crash retrieval, some of these crash retrieval programs, and maybe which facility?
Yeah, I see that there's a theory from when we started having radio waves. That then radio waves basically just keep going and going and going and going. And at this point, since they first started broadcasting radio waves, the first ones would have got 120 billion light years away by now. So anything like any hostile alien or any alien thing within that, and people think that, well, in a galaxy far, far away, well, not that far away, but within the 40, I think it's like 40 billion light years away, there's a planet that resembles, like, where scientists have said if there's life, it's probably on that, because it's the same, it's like it's another Earth, basically. So it could possibly be from radio waves. But yeah.
These military bases that the recovered material would be in. And I know a lot of Congress talked about we're going to go to Area 51 and, and there's nothing there anymore anyway. It's just, and we move like a glacier. And as soon as we announce it, I'm sure the moving vans would pull up, but please.
I can't discuss that publicly, but I did provide that information both to the Intel committees and the Inspector General.
And we could get that in the skiff if we were allowed to get in a skiff with you. Would that be probably what you would think?
Sure, if you had the appropriate accesses, yeah.
What special access programs cover this information, and how is it possible that they have evaded oversight for so long?
I do know the names. Once again, I can't discuss that publicly and how they've evaded oversight. In a closed setting, I can tell you the specific tradecraft used.
All right. When do you think those programs began, and who authorized them?
I do know a lot of that information, but that's something I can't discuss publicly because of sensitivities.
All right. If any of y'all want to jump in on any of this, you're more than welcome to. What level of security clearance is required to fully access these programs?
Well, anybody who has...
and I say that because myself, Representative Gates, and Representative Luna were basically turned away at one point at Eglin. So please go right ahead.
Certainly difference between member access and, say, somebody like me, but anybody who has a TSSCI clearance and meets the eligibility criteria, the access adjudicative authority should be able to grant you access.
Ms. Burchett, if you'll yield, so just to put a fine point on that, there's nothing that you're aware of that's above special access program classification.
It's a misnomer that there's anything actually above top secret. Executive Order 13526 delineates the classification levels.
Right, but I draw a point on that because we can have access to those programs, and so the notion that we're not being given that access sort of defies our typical muscle memory here in Congress. Thank you, Mr. Burchett. I'll yield back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Gates.
If they're getting turned away, that's going to...
know this or not, but Title 10 and Title 50 authorization, they seem to say they're inefficient. So who gets to decide this, in your opinion, in the past?
It's a group of career senior executive officials.
Okay, are they government officials?
Both in and out.
Do what?
Both in and out of government, and that's about as far as I can go there. Yeah.
All right, well, that leads to my next question. Which private corporations are directly involved in this program? How much taxpayer money has been invested in these programs, to your knowledge? I mean, we know we audit the Pentagon every year, and I've been here 5 years, and they failed the dadgum thing every year. They lose over $1 billion a year, we think, and I was told the Department of Defense maybe 60% of their assets are unaccounted for, whatever the heck that means. In the public sector, you go to jail for that kind of crap. So tell me.
Yeah, I know when I'm $1 off of my DTS travel voucher, I get hammered, but it seems like it doesn't work the other way.
If you sell over if you sell over $600 worth of stuff on eBay, now you get a call from the IRS. So please, what corporations?
Yeah, I don't know the specific metrics towards the end of your question. The specific corporations I did provide to the committees in specific divisions, and I spent 11 and a half hours.
You can see that there's like, I feel like Congress feels like there's a major red flag because they can't get access. Like, that would raise your thing to say, well, I should be able to, but you're not letting me. How much you want to bet that Miss Luna, Mr. Burchett, and the other one, Garcia, how much do you want to bet that they're the next ones to disappear? But then maybe not now that it's so out in the open.
Both intel committees. So.
Okay, has there been an active U.S. government disinformation campaign to deny the existence of unidentified aerial phenomena? And if so, why?
I can't go beyond what I've already espoused publicly about that.
Okay, I've been told to ask you what that is and how to get it in the record.
What have you stated publicly in your interviews for the congressional record?
If you reference my News Nation interview and I talk about a
Why didn't you just say?
Campaign to disenfranchise public interest, basically. Yeah.
Thank you.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. I yield back negative 21 seconds.
Thank you. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for coming here today. I do concur with the ranking member as well as several other members here on this committee that this is a committee for whistleblowers and for the protection of whistleblowers as well. So we understand what you're putting on the table here and what you're putting on the line here, and we thank you for that. Mr. Grush, you sat on the Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon Task Force created in the 2020 NDAA, correct?
Yes.
There have been some things that have been mentioned here during this hearing that I wanted to pick up on. Mr. Graves, you mentioned specifically during the answers to one of your questions, you named Boeing contractors being engaged in an incident regarding this red cube about a football field wide. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the interaction, or Mr. Grush, either of you, the interactions between defense contractor companies and any UAP-related programs or activities.
So I'll just say that the information about the contractor themselves were provided by a witness, and I have no particular detail in that relationship.
Mr. Grush?
The kind of general unclassed wave tops, certainly the contractors, are the metal benders, so to speak. They're the ones actually doing specific performance on government contracts.
Are they required to issue any disclosure regarding UAP sightings, or do they engage in any reporting around this?
In terms of the contractors?
Yes.
Not that I'm aware of.
They do not. Okay. Now, when it comes to notification that you had mentioned about IRAD programs, we have seen defense contractors abuse their contracts before through this committee. I have seen it personally, and I have also seen the notification requirements to Congress abused. I am wondering, one of the loopholes that we see in the law is that there is, at least from my vantage point, is that depending on what we're seeing, is that there are no actual definitions or requirements for notification. What methods of notification did you observe? Like when they say they notified Congress, how did they do that? Do you have insight into that?
For certain IRAD activities, I can only think of ones conventional in nature. Sometimes they flow through certain, I'll just say, SAP programs that have cognizant authority over the Air Force or something, and those are congressionally reported compartments, but IRAD is literally internal to the contractor, so as long as it's money, either profits, private investment, et cetera.
And
they can do whatever they want.
To put a finer point on it, when there is a requirement for any agency or company to notify, or any agency to notify Congress, do they contact the chairman of a committee? Do they get them on the phone specifically? Is this through an email to hypothetically a dead email box?
A lot of it comes through what they call the PPR, Periodic Program Review process. If it's a SAP or Controlled Access Program Equity, and then those go to the specific committees, whether it be the SAS, CASC, HISI.
Thank you. I apologize. I just, my time is limited. Mr. Graves, one of your main concerns is that the FAA currently does not have an official process to receive reports of UAP from pilots or others, correct?
Correct.
And in your experience, what data should the Aero program prioritize for potential collection? We have, location, date, time, but are there other specific characteristics that should be included in these reports?
Certainly. I think that there's two categories that would be important. One would be kinematics and understanding the specifics of how the vehicle or objects are moving. And the second would be a more zoomed out approach of being able to look at origin and destination before the incident, as well as getting a better contextual understanding of how these objects are interacting with each other.
Thank you. Now, because I only have a minute left, I apologize, we only have 5 minutes today, but for the record, if you were me, where would you look? Titles, programs, departments, regions, if you could just name anything. And I put that as an open question to the three of you.
I'd be happy to give you that in a closed environment. I can tell you specifically.
Thank you. Commander Fravor?
And I would say, and I've told people that you have to know where to look. They're not going to divulge it to you because of the classification levels. But if you know where to look and who to talk to, which is exactly what Mr. Grush can point you, then you have them.
Okay. Mr. Graves?
I was an operator, so I was depending on folks like Mr. Grosh to do that homework.
Okay. Thank you very much. I yield back to the chair.
Mr. Bake?
Oh yeah, we stopped that. Very interesting. Something tells me that she's going to get got too. Because she seems like she asked that question for a very good reason. And the reason is because she's going to go looking. She's going to want some answers. And I don't know, this whole thing, it seems like it's not just a case of the UFO thing. The UFO phenomenon is kind of, I feel like, being the spearhead of another kind of attack, where that matey said about them following their, losing their audit, failing their audit, and the fact that 60% of their whatever is unaccounted for. So it feels like there's more at hand, and it would make sense that within that billion, then yeah, that's what they're doing. Because I was going to say, who has the Men in Black then? If aliens are real and the Men in Black are all real, obviously not Will Smith, I mean the real Men in Black. If that's real, yeah, who's in charge of them? Yeah. It's going to be very interesting how this all plays out. I'm very much looking forward to it. Just to see, like, because as well, even if the phenomena gets explained logically, I think that's the trouble. Like, I remember watching a thing disproving Roswell, and the trouble is they do these videos disproving them, and they just make you believe it even more, because you just think that's not even logical what you said. Like the weird text or the weird symbols printed on a strip of metal on the found in the Roswell debris. They are in some documentary. They explained it by it was a hot air balloon, and that bit of metal had something else over it, and the sun burnt that in great. And it's like, well, that's not a good enough answer. Like, why then? Why does the weather balloon need that thing with all these crazy shapes and and that on it. And you're telling me that the sun managed to burn them. It just didn't add up to me. It didn't add up. This is good because Congress seems to have a bee in their bonnet about the government anyway, the American government. So this will be very interesting to see. We live in very interesting times. We really do. Really do. Like they just said, that there was a point where this topic was laughable to people, but now they're talking about it seriously in Congress. But I do think a lot of these are going to get capped. I just do. But yeah, that's the reaction. Sweet.